Welcome to BEN, the Business and Employment News Network. You're watching The Run, BEN's panel covering the 2016 presidential race. I'm pleased to welcome our guests from right to left, Todd Seavey and Anders Kaur, Heather Woodfield and Melody Brooks. Todd is a libertarian writer and TV producer. He's the author of the forthcoming book, Libertarianism for Beginners. Anders specializes in nuclear weapons security and other aspects of foreign policy. He worked for 5 years in military intelligence in Europe, Asia, and Afghanistan. He holds a PhD from Harvard University. Heather was a local organizer for the Howard Dean presidential campaign, hosting the largest meetup in the country. She is co-founder of Democracy for NYC, a citywide grassroots political action committee, My Vote Will Count, which registered 10,000 students to vote, and executive director of arts advocacy group 1% for Culture. And Melody Brooks is director of the New Perspectives Theater Company, an award-winning multiracial ensemble committed to theater as an agent of social change. Todd, Anders, Heather, Melody, welcome. My name is Jonathan Funk, and I am a political centrist. It's been about 20 years now since I realized I had a problem with the way our two parties relate to each other. But just when you've hit rock bottom, and that's pretty much where approval ratings are for Congress right now, that's when the breakthrough comes. All of a sudden, House Speaker John Boehner is promising, quote, strong Republican support for one of President Obama's key priorities. Meanwhile, the president himself is coming out swinging against fellow Democrat Senator Elizabeth Warren. Practically sounding a Republican talking point, he said, quote, her arguments don't stand the test of fact and scrutiny. He even accused her of being a politician. Meanwhile, Republican Senator Susan Collins says she's skeptical, and Republican Representative Bruce Pollenquin has been driven to, quote, talk to his own constituents. This is amazing. Even the animosity is bipartisan. What's enabling this unbelievable outburst of bipartisanship? Here's the run. It's called the Transpacific Partnership, or TPP. It's a proposed trade agreement with a dozen countries across Asia. It's still in the early stages of negotiation, but I guess you could say the president decided to just do it. By that I mean he went to Nike's headquarters in Oregon to rally support for the plan. What is TPP? What does it mean for U.S. trade in Asia? And what does Obama hope to achieve? Anders, what's our sneaky president up to this time?
Well, I think the president's decision is actually quite good on TPP. The TPP is going to increase GDP in the U.S., I would estimate by 5%. Some low estimates are by 1% over a decade. It will improve our strategic position, our foreign policy position with all of the 12 TPP countries, including a lot in Asia. China is being left out, which is smart in my opinion, for one reason, because China's the assistance that China's jobs give us is a lot less than, or jobs and economy and exports give us, is a lot less than the assistance that we get from, say, Canada and Mexico, both of which are in the TPP. So it's a great proposal. I think it's positive for our economy on net-net.
Okay, let's start with China, because this is our biggest rival, according to many, particularly Republican talking points. A rising power. They've lifted more people out of poverty more quickly, but at great environmental cost and at great cost in terms of our own competitive advantage. Why are they out of it? Is it their choice? Is there a chance they will change their mind?
Well, one reason I think to leave them out of it from an economic perspective is supply chain issues. Now, something that NAFTA has done for our supply chain is that it's increased it across borders. So now when the U.S. imports things from Canada, and Canada is our biggest exporter to the United States, 40% of the Canadian goods that we import from Canada are actually origined from the United States. So we're shipping parts to Canada, they're assembling them, and they're shipping them back to the United States. That's jobs for Americans. Same thing with Mexico. That's 25% for Canada. Same thing with Mexico. 40% of the goods we import from Mexico are actually origined from the United States. That, again, is jobs for Americans.
Which is how you end up with a car that has a sticker that says it's 72% sourced in the United States,
exactly,
and 18%.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then with China, however, only when we import things from China, only 4% of those components and those parts are made in the United States. So China is actually not as good, as far as free trade agreement with China, is not as good as these other countries. The other reason why it's not as good to include China is that they're developing into a geopolitical rival, a strategic rival. They're doing things in the South China Sea and globally as far as influence that are not pro-American. They're rallying countries against the United States. So That would be another reason why we are not really including China at this time.
Okay, now one of the arguments we've heard is that China doesn't want to be involved, and it's not in their interest to be involved, because if they get involved in TPP, they'll be subject to these increased environmental and labor regulations that Obama has promised will be part of this deal. Do you buy that?
No, I think China desperately would like to be involved, but they're being excluded, and they're being quiet about that so as not to show a big rivalry with the United States.
Melody?
Well, I think that it's interesting that we talk about where things are sourced and where things are assembled, because if in fact we had the manufacturing sector that we used to have, parts would be made here and everything would be assembled here as well. So when we talk about that's jobs for the United States, no one is talking about the fact that we've lost millions of jobs, and so the ones that are coming back through these trade deals are a fraction of what used to be here, and that. The idea of excluding China, it really is a much more political reason than a trade deal, because if we, all of this is driven by corporations. That China's most favored trade nation status, which many, not just on the left, but people throughout the country argued against for years because of their human rights violations, because of their environmental disasters, but we went ahead and gave it to them anyway because there were corporations that could make a lot of money in China. That's changing now. The wages are going up in China, the average wage, and so and China is looking to have its own imprint in countries around the world. I mean, they're doing a lot in Africa right now that we're not doing, and so I really feel like excluding China is a political choice, and maybe also hey, we should do this because it excludes China. Is not a big selling point, I think.
Now China has. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's the one piece of the choice that I feel is political. The rest is political, and that is driven by political money coming from corporations. Right. It's largely this whole entire agreement is driven by corporations for the benefit of corporations, and not really looking at the national interest or the bigger picture.
It even gives away sovereign authority, that it puts corporations on a par with nation states, so that they have to go to tribunals if they feel that that there's public interest legislation that conflicts with their ability to make a gazillion trillion % profit, that they can take a nation to a tribunal and argue against that.
Well, they can do that through the WTO now.
Yeah, but not in the same way. This literally supersedes sovereign authority. They can do it. They can't do it with us. They are doing it now with some of the trade agreements and with the WTO with smaller nations that can't afford to fight back. So notoriously is health warnings on cigarette labels, that in smaller nations, the major tobacco companies are not letting them put health warnings on their cigarettes and they don't have the money to go and fight back and to have the legal ability to say, no, this is the health of our citizens. So that's what I think we can look forward to as Americans. We've got a lot of stuff in place. The question would be whether we can erode stuff that we already had, because that's what's happening with the smaller nations. And also the thing that nobody talks about is that the real heart of this deal is intellectual property and trademark authority, right? So that corporations can really hang on to the last, nano inch of their rights in this intellectual property. It also, we know already that it stifles innovation. You want to talk about stifling innovation. Free trade, innovation, but that they're going to have a stranglehold on everything, branding and trademarking. It's already, there's ludicrous degrees of it here in this country where people are trademarking a word, like margarita, and that you're, theoretically could charge everybody for saying, and margarita is real. I didn't pull that out of thin air.
That was part of NAFTA, right?
Yeah, right. So well, no, it wasn't. But trying to trademark these things, or the Happy Birthday song, which. And it's interesting because somebody did, but a long, long time ago. And it's not, we want to talk about original intent. If you go back and look at what the founders intended for patents and trademarks, it was not that people would hold on to them for 100,000 years.
Well, now, Melody, isn't it a problem that China has been ripping off American exporters in the film and music industries forever? Isn't it a problem that it took a generation for Americans to get used to paying for music again, and even then artists are not being properly compensated?
No, artists are being compensated. It's a whole new model for the music industry.
Well, they're getting pennies on it.
Well, no, they're not, because they're now making their money from their live appearances and from merchandising. And that they have really, if you talk to musicians, they don't have a problem with the downloading and people paying 99 cents for a song, because it's building the brand. It's making their live performances much more lucrative.
Oh, that is so 2012. I mean, in a Spotify world, People are not paying anything to download anything. They're just subscribing to a streaming service, and ASCAP hasn't really. I mean, well, you're both in the arts. I mean, Heather, do you disagree?
No, they're not. Artists are not making, at least especially in the music industry, are not making money off the record, off the album. It's all in the touring. It's all in the merchandising. And if you're big enough, it gets made up. It's the small independent artists who, I hope everyone is, going out and purchasing their work to
But
support
many of them
that.
are really behind the democracy of the internet. They want their music out there.
But I don't want to say that IP trade isn't an issue. It is a big. There's a lot of literally knockoff goods, where
There has
they're
been
making
for years.
something to make it look like and there's huge issues in China especially, and stricter IP laws that address those knockoff issues, that could be warranted. I mean, this is clearly a clear case of intellectual property.
Todd, is the problem with free trade too much protection for intellectual property?
I think intellectual property is sort of a separate issue. I don't know if it's a good idea to bind it up with.
It's central to NAFTA. I mean, the Mexican strengthening of IP recognition.
But I mean, it's not a geographic issue. It's sort of like if you're asking me how to define assault or something like that. I mean, it's not going to depend on whether you're in Greenland or Paraguay. So we could have a whole debate about whether intellectual property is a legitimate form of property, but.
Do you think it's important to TPP? Is it a reason to get behind TPP? Was it a good reason to get behind NAFTA?
It's so ambiguous. I don't think I can get into it really. I mean, if you want me, okay, if you really want me to, I will. But it has nothing to do with international trade agreements.
Anders, do we have a volunteer?
From my point of view.
Well, I think that intellectual property is important to the TPP and to NAFTA. It's one of the things that President Obama will be pushing for in terms of getting agreement from the 12 nations to honor intellectual property, not only intellectual property, but environmental regulations, labor regulations. He's going to be trying to encourage all of these countries to improve their regulations across the board, whether it's intellectual property, environment, or labor.
Right, and trying is the operative word because he's not selling it, it's trying. He is guaranteeing that these will all be better. He ran in 2008 about reforming NAFTA because we saw that those exact things were not held up, the environmental regulations, human rights, the labor laws. And in 2008, he claimed that he would go back and renegotiate NAFTA. The Korean trade agreement was supposed to give us, right the balance of trade, and it would make huge numbers of jobs. We now have a $12 billion trade deficit with Korea, which we didn't have before the deal. And so this notion, it's really interesting that Obama has chosen this
Trade
thing
deficits to aren't that bad for
Well,
jobs.
they're not that bad for the economy.
That just
but
means that we're
never talk about what happens
importing
to
stuff
real
and we're
people.
sending them
But you're not
paper
talking
money.
about
That's what a
real
trade
people,
deficit
right?
is.
Nike, his little stunt at Nike, which is guaranteed, said, we'll keep 10,000 jobs in the United States.
They're going to increase 10,000
It doesn't
jobs.
matter. They still have the vast majority of their employees outside of the United States. New Balance, however, has maintained all of their production in the United States. So these trade deals also give giveaways to these companies that are outsourcing their jobs, in the hundreds of thousands. So to say, we'll add 10,000 jobs, again, it's interesting that this is what he's chosen to fight for and to say, this will all happen. If that's true, why can't anybody read it? It has been in negotiation for 6 years. 600
Because you read it, the special
corporations.
interests dive in and
They've
take
already
it apart.
done it. The special interests have created it. 600 corporations
special
wrote
interests.
this thing.
We'll have months to look at it once
Right.
it's in some sort of
No,
form,
but we don't, because what happens is what he's
they'll
pushing
pass
for
it in
with
the middle of the night.
fast track is that he gets to negotiate it. All Congress gets is an up or down vote. They don't get to amend it. So is Congress really going to say no after all of this has gone through and whatever he's negotiated?
If it goes to Congress, a line item thing, it gets
If
torn
it-
apart. And then how do you?
it's not a
you
line-
can't
but we can't
negotiate
even
that way.
read it.
You can't.
There should
you
be
can't have a
public-
12-country negotiation
But the
and bring
Senate
it
has
back
to approve-
and then let
The
those
Senate
guys
approves
break it
treaties,
apart.
right? The Senate has to approve treaties.
Yeah, up or
so
down.
this is no, but they get
Approve,
to
not
read, but they
negotiate.
get to
Yeah.
read it. They get to understand what's in it.
And they
Congress,
will. They'll have plenty of time
Yeah.
to decide
No.
whether or not they want to approve it. They
They-
just aren't part of the negotiation.
Yes,
process.
but if it's-
Unrealistic
Isn't that
to
what-
have
isn't
the
that why we have
entire
an
But our
executive?
elected representatives aren't part of the negotiation process, yet lots
Or
of
even get to-
corporations
right,
are.
600
Who's running this
corporations.
country?
Well,
The
corporations
people
aren't
or the
involved.
corporations?
Yes.
That's a
They are too
fundamental issue
involved.
here.
600 corporations. The only reason we know half of what's in it is because it's been leaked. by WikiLeaks, even by Darrell Issa, a congressman. Even now, if a congressperson wants to go read the current draft, they have to go do so under strict secrecy. They have to, swear that they won't tell what's in it. Why is that level of secrecy so necessary if, in fact, it's going to do all these magical things they say it will do?
You can't
They're-
negotiate
Exactly.
with 12
Nuclear
countries.
This is a trade
Why
with the
we
whole world
can't
watching.
even read it? 6 years and we can't even read it. And for Obama to take on Elizabeth Warren, Sherrod Brown, and these other people over this, and then you even sit here and say he's going to try to get people to honor the environmental agreements and the labor
I mean,
laws.
that's part of the agreement. Don't pick on that
It's
one
a
word.
part of all of them, but none of them have been enforced. None of
Todd.
this has been enforced.
All of those worries are a reminder that so-called free trade agreements are really mercantilist agreements, and tragically, increasingly for 100 years, instead of just letting people trade with each other, it's expected government will have a huge hand and work with corporations in shaping trade quotas and import quotas and export quotas. Real free market economists know that trade imbalance is a meaningless term. If you get goods from elsewhere, you paid for them. If all the customers and sellers are happy, nation states shouldn't even be worrying about it. Big trade agreements are not the time to ask what your environmental standards and how workers are treated in factories. The ideal trade agreement would be universal throughout all of time and space, and would just say you can't interfere with two people voluntarily trading with each other. Every time two people decide to trade, one sells, one buys. For them, regardless of what outside observers think, it must have been deemed mutually beneficial, or one of them would have said, I don't want to make this trade. And every time a third party, usually government, sometimes a burglar, comes in and says, you can't make that trade, or you must make some other trade, you're causing a net decrease in human happiness. Every interference with trade is a tragedy and is immoral. And the worst thing you could possibly do to the human race is say, let's prevent trade, let's prevent commerce, or if you really want to go all the way, be Karl Marx and say, stop engaging in commerce and the use of property. And so to the extent an agreement like this gets rid of some tariffs and regulations, it simplifies and streamlines things. And similarly on the intellectual property point, it's debatable philosophically whether fundamentally there ought to be intellectual property, but at least it'd be nice if the rules were predictable for people going forward, so they know, can I trademark Disney stuff or can I not? At least if you know that there's no intellectual property, you can make trade secret agreements, for instance, and say you can buy this novel, but you're not allowed to write articles about it, things like that. And I think we'd have an elaborate body of trade secrets law if we didn't have copyrights and patents. What annoys people is when there's spotty enforcement. They don't know, like, wait, do I own this record or do I cease to own it when it goes to China? That sort of thing. So you don't want law to be haphazard. You want predictable rule of law.
Are you saying damn the social costs? Like free trade, yay, damn the social costs. Like what if there's global warming and it kills us all? Is that good for us? If in a generation with this planet is uninhabitable?
That would be an externality you could sue for. It's damage to other people's property. So that's not free trade.
No, but
we're going to do it in the court.
The suing actually requires environmental law to be able to sue.
ridiculousness
No,
of
it
this
doesn't.
intellectual property
No.
law is that they're even trying to propose that if I buy a CD, and I know CDs are, will soon be no more, and I sell it in my garage sale, that I'm not allowed to sell it in my garage sale. Because I have purchased that thing from the corporation that made it, and I can't get $1 now on it in my garage sale. They've literally proposed that. So that's the extent to which we're talking about what is really in this approach to intellectual
and that's
property.
the sort of thing that should be decided between the buyer of the item and the
Of
seller
course,
of the item,
but it
not
literally says
not by
even
government.
if you've bought it, you don't own it. If I buy the CD, I don't own it.
CDs and garage
if-
sales don't exist anymore.
If you know
Well,
that at
they
the
do.
time,
They do.
in other words, if companies
Outside of New York City, even in New York
They
City, in
exist
Brooklyn,
in New
they
York
have garage
City. I don't
sales.
know who you
They
know,
do
but
stoop
I know a
sales.
garage sale this weekend.
governments have been trying to ban many aspects of flea markets, so it is a miracle they still exist. But of course, I'm all for it. With CDs, again, if there were no intellectual property rights, a company could still say, here's the contract the purchaser of this CD signs, and it says you can't make a duplicate of it or resell it. That is up to you and the company. Again, I'm just saying
but
it shouldn't be up to
We've
governments.
always had patent laws. I mean, since the founding of this country, I think patents are in the sort of original DNA of this country. But what is changed about it over the last 20 years and what the corporations are seeking goes beyond all reason.
That may be true.
We have an information economy, and so part of our negotiation in these free trade agreements is to protect our information
Right,
property,
but we're also talking
right?
about
so that
this
actually protects American jobs to do that.
genetic into property rights are included in the TPP. We've already had one battle here. The Supreme Court did actually say you own your own genetic material.
You're arguing against jobs when you
no,
argue
we're not.
against
It's not
American
against
jobs when you argue against
It's a
intellectual
lie.
property.
Where did the American
the bribe of
come
jobs that
from?
Nike offered?
At the lowest wage, the race to the bottom at the wage scale, and how many jobs we have lost. You're talking about a tiny bit of jobs coming back through these deals at much lower wages.
Nike's
much
promised a
lower
lot of
wages.
jobs. Do these jobs ever actually materialize, and can you even tell?
Yes, absolutely. I mean,
10,000 is
actually
nothing.
the only thing that really is going to transition as far as jobs from this agreement are manufacturing jobs. Manufacturing jobs only comprise about 13% of U.S. jobs. Now that
Right,
actually,
but that's because of all the
then you
trade
have
and
you have
outsourcing of
trade
everything.
assistance programs, right? Where we
That's
can
not a done
assist
deal.
people with
That is a
education.
recommendation.
We can
It's-
assist people with.
Congress, some of the Democrats in Congress are asking for that to be added to this vote that they're going
And
to
that's a
take.
good deal.
But it's not being. It's not. Mitch
Well,
McConnell
argue
has
for
said
that.
no.
Don't argue for
We
old
can argue
school.
for any
you know.
number of- it's not
that.
old
I mean,
school anything.
that's the thing to argue for. Not
It's-
just
it's-
no trade, not isolationism.
No one's saying no trade. No one is saying no trade.
Okay, so you're for,
I'm
you're,
saying
if
no
you're
one
for
is saying
trade,
no
that's good.
trade.
We all agree.
Heather,
We
last
all
word for
had
the segment.
trade. We've had trade for 200
Trade.
years.
No trade agreements without a fair and open democratic process where the people know what's going on.
Right.
We are not
That's a
giving them the
poison pill
nuclear
approach.
codes. This is trade.
TPP, well, you know me. When we come back, what else we know about free trade on The Run.